and all those bits of your body that you're not using a lot. So, you know, the rear end's gone. Don't need that. Legs got really, really skinny, even though I could stand up on the raft and tried to, you know, like holding on to it. It was kind of like a bit like walking on water.
7 days into his solo transatlantic trip, Steve Callahan's boat collided hard with something beneath the waves. As his boat sank, he launched his self-inflating life raft into the pitching seas. A line tethered the raft to the swamped boat.
Once I got into the life raft, I didn't want to leave Napoleon Solo until I absolutely had to, because that boat contained food, water, all kinds of things.
Watertight compartments that Steve had built into the Napoleon Solo kept it from sinking immediately.
That gave me a chance to get back on board and dive down and get some really critical equipment, especially this emergency bag that I had.
Still tethered to the boat, the raft too was in danger of being swamped.
And these big waves that would come by would hit the raft and just like smash it. It was like being in an auto accident every few minutes. It would just like completely collapse the raft, and I'd get pinched in there and water would come flying in everywhere, and I was really worried that the raft was going to tear itself to bits.
But Callahan didn't want to cut loose from his boat and lose his best chance of surviving this ordeal.
I was going through all these kind of dream-like scenarios of, oh, well, maybe if it gets light, I can see where the damage is, and maybe I can figure out a way of repairing it and pump the boat out and actually carry on my way. You know, you never want to leave the boat until you know it's completely doomed.
But the raging sea made the decision for him.
There was suddenly one of these big waves that came and hit the raft, and then it seemed suddenly very peaceful. And I looked out, and I was drifting away from Napoleon Solo.
In the darkness, Callahan watched his boat as it was pushed further and further away by the waves. Steve noted the date, February 5th, day one of his new life.
The first thing I did was tie everything into the raft. With the raft being vulnerable, you know, you lose a bit of equipment, that's it, you're done.
His top priority was food and water. Luckily, the survival kit had 8 one-pint cans of fresh water, a can of peanuts, a bag of dry beans, and a box of raisins. So for the time being, his immediate needs were taken care of.
I started to adapt the attitude that this is not the end of a voyage, it's a continuation. It's just in a little bit more humble craft. So develop a shipboard routine, keep a log, exercise, navigate, normalize life as much as possible in order to get through this period of disorientation and fear into a period of adaptation or the survival routine.
Steve took a careful inventory of everything he managed to salvage from his boat.
Almost all survival experiences are somehow trying to figure out how to solve problems in an isolated environment with limited resources. And in a life raft, the resources are pretty limited. So you get right down to basics of living and what you really need.
He had grabbed some medical supplies, coils of line of various diameters, and a fishing kit.
It was like, 50-foot piece of string and a little trout hook, and I was like, maybe I'll catch a few bait fish or something with this, but it was pretty useless.
More valuable was a stock of signal flares.
I had a whole arsenal of flares of very good types. Parachute flares, which go up, they pop a little parachute, they hang in the air for a very long time. Plus I had meteor flares that would go up and down much quicker, and then hand location flare. So the idea is you send up the parachutes first. If somebody sees that, they get close to you, and then you do the hand flares.
Also in the kit was a last-minute addition he had picked up just before he started his trip.
A little shorty spear gun that I bought in the Canary Islands. I figured, well, this might come in handy when I get to the Caribbean. Maybe I'll do a little spear fishing, but it was really almost a toy.
He also had an emergency radio transmitter,
which sends out an SOS signal. And they were being monitored by aircraft, but an aircraft had to be within about 250 miles of you or nobody would hear you.
It would only transmit a signal as long as its battery lasted. It was a long shot that any airliner would be passing over that empty part of the ocean. However, the most critical piece of survival gear was decidedly the most low-tech: a saltwater distillation still.
It's like a little environment where you can pour seawater from the top and it drips down the inside in this black cloth, which the idea is that the sun comes out and evaporates fresh water out of the salt, and it collects on the inside of this balloon and rains down on the inside into a little collection bag.
Without fresh water, Steve would die. After many frustrating failed attempts, Steve got the still to work. He started producing a few ounces of fresh water just as his canned supply ran dry.
I had 8 pints to start with, which was a good start, and that gave me a window of opportunity to get the solar stills working, and then they would produce maybe a pint and a half a day on a good day.
A few other little items, easily overlooked, also proved helpful to Steve.
One of the most important things that I had were these little dime store pads of paper and pencils, because that would allow me to keep a log, and that was really important to me, both from a pragmatic level in terms of doing navigational notes and stuff, knowing when, oh, now I'm going through a shipping lane, I should keep better watch for ships, to the psychological element of this being a continuation of a voyage. I'm still in command of a little boat, I'll keep a log, and be able to step outside all the pain and frustration and all of that, and be able to observe things almost like a third person looking down upon me. And that was really important.
Bobbing along behind the raft was a tall marker buoy salvaged from the boat. Tethered by a line, the buoy was there to help would-be rescuers spot the raft as he moved with the westward current. From a few yellow pencils, Steve fashioned a rudimentary sextant. During the day, he estimated his latitude, and with the night stars, he plotted his course.
The line that I had out the back was basically a 70-foot piece of line, so I made up a little speed distance table, like a little speedometer, and I could time seaweed or something floating by.
He knew his approximate speed and his current location, and roughly how far he was from the closest islands in the Caribbean. So Steve crunched the numbers to figure out how long he had to drift before he made landfall. The arithmetic dealt a sobering blow, a number that no one, drifting alone, had ever endured before. The good news for Steve was that after nearly 2 weeks in the Atlantic, he was drifting towards the Caribbean islands. The bad news? At his current speed, it would take him 2 months to get there.
It just seemed like, I'm 30 years old and what have I done? Well, I've drawn a few pictures, I designed a couple of boats, and I died. You know, it was really pretty grim.
Miraculously, he spotted a cargo ship in the distance. He scrambled to fire a few flares.
And the ship just goes steaming right by. And it was close enough I could smell the diesel in the air.
The vessel disappeared over the horizon.
And I was pretty upset.
A number of large fish started to swim alongside and tag along with the raft. These were dorados, square-headed, 3-foot-long aquamarine fish with yellow tails. They're popularly known as mahi-mahi. Steve took aim with the spear gun.
I might hit one, but not strong enough so that it would go through the fish. And within about 24 hours, they knew exactly what the range of my spear gun was, and they'd be like swimming just outside that range.
The large 30 to 40 pound fish darted close to the raft and often intentionally struck the raft.
Big males, which have very bony, square-shaped heads, would hit it quite powerfully. In fact, when I was lying down inside, I'd have to make sure that my head was on like a gear bag or something like that, because otherwise it'd be just like somebody coming up and just whacking me.
Steve leaned over the raft, poised for hours with spear gun at the ready, awaiting an unsuspecting fish. He nailed it. Fresh food for the first time in weeks.
When I caught the first fish, all of a sudden the other fish that were there went into this kind of frenzy, and they kept smacking the bottom of the raft, just smack, 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 smack. Wouldn't let me have any rest or anything. And I felt like I was caught in this Alfred Hitchcock Birds kind of thing. It was I'm in the fish, and the fish are eventually gonna destroy the raft and eat me. And that went on for quite a while.
Steve cut the fish meat into 1-inch thick strips, 6 inches long. He pierced a hole in the strip and hung it from a string he'd tied across one corner of the raft. He called this area the butcher shop.
And I start eating it, and it was like, oh man, this is good.
One fish gave enough food for 3 or 4 days. Days passed into weeks. Steve's shipboard routine kept his mind on the task at hand, survival. Along with his still and collected rainwater, a steady supply of fish and even an occasional bird kept his body nourished. But there were always present dangers from the elements and the sea that could take his life at any moment.
I was concerned about sharks. I wasn't concerned so much that they were gonna like leap up and drag me out of the raft or something like that, but I knew they could be quite aggressive. I was kind of asleep, and all of a sudden on the bottom of the raft was this flap, 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 and it was a Dorado. And then boom, the whole raft was like thrown off the surface of the water, and it was a shark going after the Dorado that was under the raft. I was, of course, heart in the mouth and the whole bit, and I grabbed the spear gun and I kept jabbing at it, and I finally got a couple of good hits on it, and it went away.
Whatever challenge he faced, Steve never let go of his lifeline, his daily routine.
There were always jobs to do, and I would concentrate on doing jobs while trying to conserve energy and having some kind of a balance in there. And then dusk would finally come along, and I would fish and call it a day.
In his small notebooks, Steve tallied the monotonous passing of the days. Everything was going as well as could be expected until March 19th, day 43 of this epic survival journey. Steve had speared a Dorado. The fish broke away, and with the spear point sticking through its side, it rammed the raft. It tore a 4-inch gash in the raft just below the waterline. The raft began to deflate.
With the bottom tube deflated, the water pressure would push up in the inside so that it was like this dome on the inside of rubber, and if I step in it, it's like being in rubber quicksand, which I was worried about my legs sticking down in the water and sharks and stuff grabbing that.
Steve's whole world quickly crumbled around him.
It made it really hard to tend to the solar still. Almost impossible to fish, and it also gave me only about this much freeboard, so any even minor waves were washing in and out of the raft. I was wet all the time, and it was miserable.
He knew the first big wave could swamp the raft, and that would be the end.
It was just such a stark thing, so I pulled myself up and I went through this really intense mind game of what I had in the raft, what could possibly fix this repair.
He didn't have any adhesive patches big enough to cover the hole, so he squeezed the ripped rubber edges together like puckered lips on a mouth and tightly wrapped them with line.
I tried external pressure patches and trying harder and harder to tie it tight. Nothing worked. So I went through this for 10 days, 24/7, just trying to deal with this leak. And it just completely exhausted me. And I finally just kind of collapsed back in the raft, and I thought that was it.
The raft was barely afloat and still 1,000 miles from land. Steve hadn't been able to fish and restock his food supply. The solar distillation still had quit working, and he was nearly out of drinking water.
I remember feeling really sorry for myself again, breaking down and feeling the water kind of washing in and out of the raft and just feeling my life just ebbing away. Maybe I can get myself together enough to have one more shot at this. If I don't get my act together here, now, this one time, I wasn't just talking about the remote possibility now that this is a matter of hours away. I'm gonna be dead, that's all there is to it. And then it dawned on me, I know what I need to do. As often is the case, in order to fix a problem, you often have to make them worse.
His new plan required that he make the hole even bigger. He also needed to sacrifice the stainless steel eating utensils from his survival kit.
I can use those as pins. I broke the handle off of a fork, and then I cut slits in the top and the bottom of the lips. And I put the foam tongue in, and I drove that pin down through the whole thing. And then behind it, I could wind lashings and make them really tight. And then it didn't matter how much pressure was in the raft, the line and everything couldn't be forced off because it was being held by that pin.
With the hand pump, Steve reinflated the raft. The repair worked. The raft was stable again.
Even though I felt really proud of myself for coming up with the answer, I'm also berating myself for being so stupid I couldn't have figured it out like a week beforehand.
With the repair complete, Steve focused on restarting the neglected solar still and restocking his food supply.
I got pretty skinny, and it was very interesting to me to see what happened to my body, because all the fat goes first and all those bits of your body that you're not using a lot. So, the rear end's gone. Don't need that. Legs got really, really skinny, even though I could stand up in the raft and tried to, like holding on to it. It was kind of like a bit like walking on water, but I got pretty good at it after a while. And my legs were strong enough to keep me up, but they were pretty thready by the end of it, sort of knobby knees. My upper body, which I used the most, my body reserved the most strength for, so it remained in fairly decent shape compared to the rest of me.
Steve caught enough of the large Dorados and other small fish to keep himself from starving. But without any fruits or vegetables, scurvy might kill him.
There was always that nagging of being hungry, always. I found it very interesting that every time I slept that I would dream of foods and drinks. But I never dreamt of steak or fish. It was always beautiful breads and fruit and all the stuff that my body needed.
A tangle of kelp floated by. Steve plucked it from the water and ate what he could to get some critical vitamins and to supplement his monotonous diet of fish.
As time went on, I became much more interested in what was inside the fish than the flesh. The fish eyes, which were nuggets of fluid, between the vertebrae, all those little discs, they were kind of fluid-like. Fresh fish liver, heart, all those things inside the fish which were providing me with vitamins and minerals and fats.
He couldn't eat an entire fish in one sitting, so he devised a way to stockpile the meat. His own fish jerky.
They would be roughly 1-inch square sections by, however long. And I'd hang them up on all these strings which would dry in the sun. And so sometimes they would keep for a really long time.
Aside from extreme weight loss, Steve suffered unavoidable saltwater sores.
They start as like little bumps on the skin, turn into these kind of pimples that end up opening up. So you have an open ulcer, much like a canker sore or something like that. It forms on the skin, and they tend to be in places where you're wet a lot and compressed, like hips, but I would end up with hundreds of these all over me, and they're very painful because, first of all, they're open ulcers, and secondly, I'm living in a salt-encrusted environment.
After 60 days adrift, the raft was stable, and Steve was winning his fight against starvation. But then, the gentle current brought him a glimmer of hope.
As far as the eye can see, I came upon these tangles of trash and weed, sargassum weed and other kinds of weed. It was all bundled up and just going forever. And although as horrible as that was, for me it was a fantastic sign. I'm on the edge of something.
Steve had reached the edge of the shipping lanes, routes trafficked by freighters crisscrossing the Caribbean Sea.
On the 75th night, I got up and I looked out, and there were kind of like these little glows on the horizon, and there were several of them. I was really getting more and more jazzed up, like, this is something. They might not be boats. They might actually be something on land. And then finally I saw what was the loom of a lighthouse definitively, because there was a pulse and a pause and a pulse, and it repeated over and over and over again. So the next morning I expected to kind of get up and maybe see something way off in the distance. But actually it was pretty close. I could see details on the land. I could see that there was an island right in front of me, and then I heard an engine. And it's getting closer and closer and closer. And I look out and I see these fishermen coming out to me. And they come up to the boat and they're talking some kind of language. I don't know what it is. I really can't figure it out. It's not really Spanish, it's not French, what is it? Well, it turns out it's Creole, and I'm not understanding a word of it. We load the raft up on the bow of the boat and roar into the island.
The fishermen sped Steve to the tiny island of Marie Galante. To Steve's good luck, the currents had drifted him to the easternmost of the Caribbean islands, just south of Guadeloupe. In 76 days, he drifted nearly 2,000 miles.
They come up towards the beach, and I'm so excited. You know, here's land, and there's a beautiful beach. I immediately just fall flat in my face on the beach. These two local guys just grab me by the arms and they just like lift me up and take me up to the local gendarme and sit me in a metal chair, and somebody thrusts a cold ginger beer in my hand, which was like, oh my God, this is so heaven.
Helpful locals delivered Steve to the hospital, where he was looked after for a few days. He contacted his parents that he was safe. Drawing from his penciled logs of the 76-day journey, Steve wrote a book titled Adrift. His vivid retelling caught the attention of film director Ang Lee. Lee talked with Steve and asked him for his input and advice on his 2012 film about a young man's struggle to survive a shipwreck, The Life of Pi.
Some of the gifts that I feel like I was given from the voyage, I found that I was a lot stronger and more adaptable than I thought I was, which is certainly important. But actually, the equal gift was being